He thought his kindness went unnoticed, but one small act sparked a fire that shook a town. Stay tuned to uncover a story that'll grip your heart. Like, subscribe, hit that bell. Stories like this give you chills. The sun hadn't yet crested the low hills of Lacey County, but Raymond Miller was already awake. At 73, his mornings began the same way they had for decades, with the creak of his old farmhouse door and the faint scent of damp earth carried on the dawn breeze. His hands, rough as the bark of the oak tree out front, bore the scars of a life spent coaxing crops from stubborn soil. Ray's faded blue flannel shirt hung loose on his wiry frame, the cuffs frayed from years of rolling them up to work. His thinning white hair caught the first rays of sunlight as he stepped onto the porch, his boots thudding softly on the weathered planks. The Miller farm, established in 1927, wasn't just land. It was his blood, his history, his everything. But lately, the weight of back taxes and paperwork errors had pressed harder than any drought. The county had slapped a foreclosure notice on his gate, giving him just 45 days to save what his grandfather had built through the Dust Bowl, what his father had preserved through lean years. Ray's hazel eyes, still sharp despite the creases around them, flickered with quiet defiance. He'd lost his wife, Clara, 2 years back, and the ache of her absence lingered like a bruise. Yet every morning he rose. He worked. He hoped, because giving up wasn't in his bones. The air smelled of hay and distant rain as he trudged toward the barn, his shadow long and lean against the golden fields. He didn't notice the world beyond his fence, didn't see the shiny SUVs speeding through town, didn't hear the gossip at the diner about that old farmer who couldn't keep up. Ray's world was here. The squeak of the barn hinges, the rustle of wheat, the memory of Clara's laugh. He grabbed his tools, a hammer, a bag of nails, and set out to fix a sagging fence post. It was small work, but small work kept the farm alive. And Ray believed in keeping things alive. Halfway down the dirt path to the field, Ray spotted something unusual. A figure sat on the old bench by the county road, a bench he'd built himself decades ago for Clara to rest on during their walks. It was a woman, frail and silver-haired, maybe 80, bundled in a threadbare grey coat despite the mild morning. Her hands clutched a worn leather journal, and her eyes, cloudy but piercing, stared at the horizon. Ray slowed his steps. Folks didn't just sit out here, not this early, not alone. Her coat was patched at the elbows, her shoes scuffed and thin-soled. Something about her stillness tugged at him, like a memory he couldn't place. "Mornin'," Ray called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her face etched with lines that told stories he'd never know. "Good morning," she replied, her voice faint but steady, like a radio signal from far away. "You all right out here?" Ray asked, resting his hammer on his shoulder. The woman nodded, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "Just remembering." Ray didn't pry. He'd learned long ago that some folks carried burdens too heavy for words. Instead, he noticed the chill in the air and the way her hands trembled slightly. "Gets cold out here," he said, reaching into his tool bag. He pulled out a spare flannel scarf, Clara's old one, red and soft, and draped it over the bench beside her. "Keep that, ain't much, but it'll help." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might protest. But then she touched the scarf, her fingers tracing the worn fabric, and whispered, "Thank you." Ray tipped his cap and turned back to his fence, the weight of her gratitude settling quietly in his chest. He didn't know her name. Didn't need to. Kindness didn't require a ledger. The morning stretched on, and Ray worked steadily, hammering nails into the fence with the rhythm of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. The sun climbed higher, warming the fields, and the scent of wildflowers mixed with the tang of rust from his tools. Every so often, he glanced at the bench. The woman was still there, now writing in her journal, the red scarf draped over her shoulders. She looked less like a stranger now, more like part of the landscape. Ray wondered about her, where she'd come from, why she sat alone, but he kept his distance. Respect, he figured, was as good as kindness. As noon approached, a pickup truck rumbled down the county road, kicking up dust. It was Tom Haskell, a neighbor who ran a small dairy farm nearby. Tom leaned out the window, his weathered face creased with curiosity. "Ray, you taking in strays now?" he called, nodding toward the woman. Ray wiped sweat from his brow and shrugged. "Just letting her rest. Ain't no harm in it." Tom's eyes lingered on the woman, then flicked back to Ray. "Folks are talking, you know. About your taxes, about the auction." Ray's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. Let him talk. I'll handle it. Tom hesitated, then nodded. You're a good man, Ray. Too good, maybe. The truck rolled off, leaving Ray with the echo of those words. Too good. He didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound like praise. Back at the fence, he drove another nail, harder than necessary, and glanced at the woman again. She was watching him now, her expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ray felt a spark of connection. Two souls carrying their own quiet battles. He nodded to her, then turned back to his work. The fence wouldn't fix itself, and neither would his life. The days slipped by, and the old woman became a quiet fixture by the county road. Every morning, Ray found her on that bench, her silver hair catching the dawn light, her worn grey coat a constant despite the warming spring. She wrote in her leather journal, sometimes staring at the fields as if they held answers she'd lost. Ray didn't ask questions. He'd bring her a thermos of coffee or a spare apple from his kitchen, setting them beside her with a simple "Mornin'." Her name, he learned, was Eleanor, though she offered little else. Her voice carried a trace of somewhere far off, maybe the coast, maybe a city long left behind. One morning, as Ray handed her a chipped mug of black coffee, she touched his hand briefly. You don't have to do this, she said, her eyes searching his. Ray shrugged, the creases around his hazel eyes deepening. Don't have to do a lot of things, still do 'em. Eleanor's lips curved, a fragile smile that felt like a gift. She pulled the red scarf tighter around her shoulders, and Ray noticed how her fingers lingered on it, like it was more than just fabric. He didn't ask. Instead, he sat on the bench's edge, keeping a respectful distance, and they watched the sunrise together. The air smelled of dew and blooming clover, and the distant hum of a tractor carried over the fields. You ever think about leaving this place? Eleanor asked suddenly. Ray's hand stilled on his hammer. Once or twice. But this land, it's my family. My wife's laugh is in that house. My father's sweat in those fields. Eleanor nodded, her gaze far away. Some places hold you, don't they? They didn't speak again, but the silence was comfortable, like two old trees weathering the same storm. Ray felt a quiet bond forming, not in words, but in shared moments. Coffee steam curling in the air, the soft scratch of her pen, the way she'd hum a tune he couldn't place. He didn't know her story, but he knew she carried weight. And that was enough. Word of Ray's kindness spread through Lacey County like ripples in a pond. At the diner in town, where the coffee was strong and the gossip stronger, folks had opinions. Marge, the waitress with a perm as stubborn as her smile, leaned over the counter one morning. Ray Miller's out there playing saint, giving scarves and coffee to some drifter, she said, pouring coffee for Tom Haskell. Tom sipped, his brow furrowed. He's got enough troubles without taking on strays. Across the room, old Mr. Carver, who'd known Ray's father, shook his head. That's Ray, always helping folks who don't deserve it. But not everyone was skeptical. Jenny, the young librarian with a soft spot for underdogs, overheard and chimed in. Maybe he's just being kind. Nothing wrong with that. Marge snorted. Kind don't pay taxes, honey. County's auctioning his farm in a month. The room buzzed with murmurs, some sympathetic, some smug. Ray's troubles were no secret. The back taxes, the paperwork mess after Clara's death, the looming auction. It was all fodder for the town's endless chatter. Some admired Ray's stubbornness, his refusal to sell even a single acre. Others, like Ed Grayson, the real estate agent with a shiny SUV, saw opportunity. Miller's sitting on prime land, Ed said at the barber shop, his voice loud enough to carry. Housing development could make millions. He's wasting it. Ray heard the whispers when he stopped by the general store for nails or picked up his mail. Folks would nod politely, but their eyes held pity or judgment. One afternoon, as he loaded his truck, Ed cornered him. Ray, let me make you an offer. Cash up front. Save you the auction hassle. Ray's jaw tightened, his hands gripping a sack of feed. Ain't selling, Ed. Never will. Ed smirked, adjusting his tie. Suit yourself, but the county don't care about your pride. The words stung, but Ray drove home in silence, the rumble of his '92 Ford pickup drowning out the doubt. He glanced at Eleanor's bench as he passed. She wasn't there, but the red scarf lay folded neatly, a small sign she'd return. That was enough to keep him going. The real test came a week later, when Ray found a new notice nailed to his gate. The county had upped the ante, $14,000 by the auction date, or the farm was gone. Ray stood in the dusk, the paper trembling in his hands, the ink blurring under the weight of his stare. Everything he'd saved, Every penny from years of lean harvests, every dollar he'd tucked away, was barely enough. He'd withdrawn it all, stuffed it in an old postal envelope under his mattress, but now it felt like a fool's hope. The next morning, he drove to the county office, his best blue button-down pressed, his hair combed with care. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at his paperwork and sighed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. Cash payments aren't accepted for auctions. You'd need a certified check." Ray's voice was steady, but his heart pounded. "Wasn't in the notice. I brought the money, all of it." The clerk hesitated, then called over a supervisor, a man in a suit, his gold watch glinting. "Mr. Miller, this isn't a yard sale," the supervisor said, his tone sharp. "Bank guarantees only, standard procedure." Ray reached into his jacket, pulling out the envelope. $14,372. Count it. The supervisor's lip curled. "Security, please." 2 guards appeared, their hands firm on Ray's arms. As they escorted him out, a crowd of developers and investors watched, some chuckling. "Did he really think cash would work?" one whispered. Ray kept his head high, his cap low, and walked to his truck. The humiliation burned, but he wouldn't let it break him. Back home, he found Eleanor on the bench, her journal open. She looked at him, her eyes knowing. "Bad day?" she asked. Ray nodded, sitting beside her. "Trying to save what's mine. Ain't easy." Eleanor touched his arm, her hand light but steady. "You're still here. That's more than most can say." Ray managed a half smile, her words a small anchor in the storm. He didn't tell her about the auction, the laughter, the envelope. But he felt her belief in him, and it was enough to face another day. The whispers in town grew louder, sharper. By the next week, the diner was abuzz with new gossip. "Ray's losing it," Marge declared, wiping down the counter. "Giving handouts to that old woman while his farm's on the block?" Tom Haskell shook his head. "He's making a fool of himself. County's going to sell that land to some Dallas firm." Even Jenny, the librarian, wavered. "I admire Ray, but maybe he's fighting a lost cause." The betrayal wasn't loud. It was in the glances, the hushed tones, the way folks avoided Ray's eyes at the store. Ed Grayson fueled the fire, spreading word that Ray was delusional for thinking he could stop the auction. "Man's living in the past," Ed told anyone who'd listen. "Progress don't wait for sentiment." Ray felt the weight of it all when he stopped by the post office and found a letter from the county. Another reminder of the auction, with a new deadline. 10 days. His chest tightened, and for the first time, doubt crept in. Was he fighting for nothing? Was the farm, his family's legacy, just a dream he couldn't afford? That evening, he sat with Eleanor, sharing a thermos of tea. She didn't speak much, but her presence steadied him. "Why do you keep coming here?" Ray asked, his voice low. Eleanor looked at the fields, her eyes distant. "This place, it reminds me of home, before I lost it." Ray didn't press, but her words lingered. Loss was a language he understood. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the wheat, Ray made a choice. He'd fight no matter what the town thought, no matter what it cost. The days dwindled, and Ray felt the auction's shadow looming like a storm cloud over the Miller farm. His hands, calloused and steady, worked harder, mending fences, tending crops, as if sheer will could hold back the inevitable. But inside, doubt gnawed. The envelope under his mattress, stuffed with $14,000, seemed to mock him. Cash wasn't enough. Pride wasn't enough. He was one man against a system that didn't care about his grandfather's sacrifices or Clara's memory. That morning, as the sun burned through the mist, Ray carried a thermos of coffee to Eleanor's bench. She wasn't there. The red scarf lay folded neatly, but her journal, her quiet presence, gone. Ray stood frozen, the thermos heavy in his hand. The air smelled of damp grass, but it felt empty without her soft humming or the scratch of her pen. Had she left for good? Was she all right? He scanned the road, the fields, hoping for a glimpse of her grey coat. Nothing. His chest tightened, a pang of loss sharper than he'd expected. Eleanor had become part of his routine, a silent ally in his fight. Now, her absence felt like another betrayal. Not by her, but by the world that kept taking. He sat on the bench, the wood creaking under his weight, and stared at the scarf. Why'd you go?" he muttered, his voice cracking. The fields didn't answer. For the first time in years, Ray felt truly alone. He clutched the scarf, its soft fibres a reminder of his small act of kindness, now seemingly wasted. The auction was in 5 days. He'd lost Clara, his savings were useless, and now Eleanor was gone. What was he fighting for? He drove home, the rumble of his '92 Ford pickup a hollow comfort. That night he didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, the stars cold and distant, and let the weight of it all press down until his shoulders shook. Not tears, not quite, but close. "Clara," he whispered, "I'm trying, I swear I'm trying." The silence was deafening. Eleanor's disappearance didn't go unnoticed in Lacey County. By noon the next day, the diner was buzzing with fresh gossip. Marge, wiping down tables, leaned toward a group of regulars. "Guess Ray's drift a friend up and left. Probably took something with her." Tom Haskell snorted, stirring his coffee. "Told you he was wasting his time. Old fool's gonna lose everything." The word spread like wildfire. At the general store, Ed Grayson, the real estate agent, smirked as he chatted with a clerk. "Miller's out there playing hero to some vagrant, and now she's gone. Proves he's got no sense." Even Jenny, the librarian who'd once defended Ray, stayed quiet when the topic came up. The town's judgment hardened, a chorus of whispers and sideways glances. Some said Eleanor was a con artist, others that Ray was naive, throwing away his dignity on a lost cause. One evening, as Ray bought nails at the hardware store, a man he barely knew, some developer in a crisp suit, clapped him on the shoulder. "Better luck next time, old man. Stick to farming, not charity." The words hit like a slap, but Ray didn't flinch. He paid for his nails and walked out, his cap low, his jaw tight. But the worst came at the county office, where he went to plead his case one last time. The same clerk, her eyes less kind now, handed him a new notice. "Mr. Miller, the auction's set, no exceptions." Behind her, the supervisor with the gold watch overheard and added, "Should have sold when you had the chance." Ray's hands shook as he took the paper, the weight of their dismissal crushing. Outside, a group of investors lingered, their laughter ringing in his ears as he climbed into his truck. "Did you see that guy? Thinks he's saving his farm with pocket change." Ray drove home, the envelope in his jacket heavier than ever. The town had turned on him, their pity replaced by mockery. He was a fool, a relic, a man out of time. And deep down, a small voice whispered, "Maybe they're right." The night before the auction, Ray sat in his farmhouse, the silence pressing against the walls. The old oak table, where he and Clara had shared countless meals, bore the scars of their life together. Burn marks from hot pans, scratches from years of use. He ran his fingers over them, each one a memory. Clara's laugh, bright as summer, her hand in his as they danced to the radio. Her voice, soft but firm, saying, "Ray, you're stubborn, but you're good." He pulled a small wooden box from a drawer, one Clara had carved herself. Inside was a locket, her wedding gift to him, with a faded photo of them, young and smiling. Ray held it, the metal cool against his palm, and closed his eyes. "I can't lose this place," he whispered. "Not just for me, for you, for us." The locket grounded him, a tether to why he fought. The farm wasn't just dirt and crops. It was Clara's garden, his father's fields, his grandfather's defiance through the Dust Bowl. It was every sacrifice, every quiet victory. Ray's resolve hardened. He'd go to the auction tomorrow, face the suits and the laughter, and fight with everything he had. Not for pride, but for legacy. He tucked the locket in his pocket, next to the envelope, and stood. The morning would come, ready or not. He'd face it like he always had. Head high, hand steady, heart full of something stronger than doubt. As he stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against his face, he looked toward Eleanor's bench. The scarf was still there, a faint red glow under the moonlight. Maybe she'd come back. Maybe she wouldn't. But Ray knew one thing. Kindness wasn't about the return. It was about the giving. And he wasn't done giving yet. The auction morning dawned grey and heavy, the air thick with the promise of rain. Ray rose before the sun, his routine unbroken despite the dread in his chest. He showered, shaved with care, and put on his best blue button-down, the one Clara always said brought out his eyes. His hands trembled as he combed his thinning hair, but he straightened his shoulders in the mirror. Today matters," he told his reflection. He pulled the envelope from under the mattress, counted the bills twice, $14,372, and tucked it into his jacket. The locket went in his pocket too, a quiet reminder of why he couldn't give up. The drive to the county seat took 40 minutes, his '92 Ford pickup rattling over familiar roads. The government building loomed ahead, its brick facade cold and unyielding. Ray parked in the public lot, watching as luxury cars and SUVs filled the spaces around him. Men in tailored suits and women with sharp heels hurried past, their voices buzzing with talk of investments and profits. Ray felt out of place. A faded flannel shirt in a sea of silk and polish. Inside the grand meeting hall, he took a seat in the back, his hands gripping the participation form he'd filled out with care. The room hummed with anticipation, developers and speculators swapping stories of deals and dollars. Ray sat alone, his weathered face a mask of calm, but his heart raced. When he approached the registration desk, the clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, glanced at his form, then at his worn boots. Her expression shifted, and she whispered to a colleague. The head auctioneer, a man with a gold watch and a slick smile, scanned Ray's paperwork and frowned. "Cash payment, Mr. Miller? That's not how this works." Ray's voice was steady. "I brought the full amount, $14,372. The auctioneer's laugh was sharp, cutting through the room. "This isn't a flea market, certified checks only." Ray started to protest. "Wasn't in the notice." But the auctioneer waved him off. "Security! Escort him out." 2 guards appeared, their hands firm but not cruel, guiding Ray toward the exit. The crowd's laughter followed him, a chorus of whispers and chuckles. Did he really think he could pay with cash? Ray didn't resist. He pulled his cap lower, clutched his envelope, and walked out, the locket heavy in his pocket. In the parking lot, he sat on his truck's tailgate, the weight of defeat pressing down. He'd lost. The farm, Clara's memory, his family's legacy, gone. He didn't notice the local reporter, her camera rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. The parking lot was quiet, save for the distant hum of the auction hall and the crunch of gravel under Ray's boots. He sat on the tailgate of his '92 Ford pickup, the envelope of cash still tucked in his jacket, the locket pressing against his hip. The morning sun burned through the clouds, but Ray barely felt it. His hazel eyes, usually sharp, stared blankly at the government building. Its brick walls a symbol of the system that had dismissed him. The laughter from inside echoed in his mind. Flea market. And for the first time, Ray wondered if he'd been wrong to fight. Maybe the farm was just dirt, not legacy. Maybe Clara would have told him to let go. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, a letter he'd sent to the governor 2 weeks earlier, pleading for a fair chance. No response had come, and he hadn't expected one. Governors didn't care about old farmers in Lacey County. He smoothed the creases, reading his own words. "I'm not asking for charity, just a chance to keep what's mine." The words felt hollow now, like a prayer unanswered. Then a sound broke his thoughts. Sirens, sharp and urgent, slicing through the morning air. Ray looked up, squinting as 5 black SUVs with tinted windows roared into the lot, followed by 2 police motorcycles. The lead vehicle bore the state flag, unmistakable even to a man who avoided politics. Doors flew open, and suited men and women spilled out, their movements crisp, their eyes scanning the lot. From the middle SUV stepped a woman Ray recognized from the news. Governor Karen Langford, 58, her dark hair pulled back, her face set with purpose. Reporters appeared from nowhere, shouting questions, but she ignored them, striding toward the building with her entourage in tow. Ray froze, his key still in his hand, the letter fluttering to the ground. What was the governor doing at a county auction? It made no sense, but a flicker of hope, small, dangerous, stirred in his chest. Inside the auction hall, the bidding was in full swing. Developers in sleek suits raised paddles, their voices sharp as they claimed parcels of land for housing projects and strip malls. The Miller farm was next, and a Dallas investment group, led by a man with a shark's smile, was ready to pounce. They'd already mapped out condos, a golf course, profits in the millions. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, his voice booming. Lot 3 Miller Farm starting at... The double doors at the back of the hall burst open. Conversations died as Governor Langford marched in, her chief of staff and security detail flanking her. The room fell silent, the auctioneer's gavel frozen midair. "This proceeding is suspended," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Where is Raymond Miller?" the auctioneer stammered, pointing vaguely toward the exit. He was removed, ma'am." "Find him," she ordered, her eyes narrowing. An aide rushed out, and within minutes, Ray was standing face to face with the governor in the parking lot. He removed his cap, his hands awkward, his heart pounding. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending a hand, "I read your letter." Ray shook her hand, his voice unsteady. "Didn't think you'd see it, ma'am." "I see a lot," she replied, a faint smile softening her face. "Your letter came at the right time. We've been investigating land auctions across the state. Irregularities, lack of transparency." Ray blinked, trying to process her words. Don't understand, ma'am. She nodded to her chief of staff, who typed rapidly on a tablet. The cash payment rule wasn't in your auction notice, Langford explained. That's a violation of state law, and the tax assessment that started this mess, riddled with errors. Ray's weathered face showed nothing, but inside, hope battled disbelief. The governor's gaze softened. Your farm, Mr. Miller, is a symbol of what built this state. We're placing an administrative hold on the sale. The aide handed Ray a document, official seals gleaming in the sunlight. The auction was halted, the tax issue under review. Ray clutched the paper, his hands trembling. For real? He whispered. For real, Langford said, her voice firm but kind. The news spread faster than a summer wildfire. By noon, the reporter who'd filmed Ray's ejection had uploaded the footage paired with the governor's intervention. The video went viral. Hundreds of thousands of views in hours, then millions by morning. Headlines screamed, "Farmer humiliated, governor steps in, and justice for 73-year-old's legacy." The auction company issued a mealy-mouthed apology, promising to review procedures. The Dallas investment group slunk away, especially after state regulators announced a probe into their land deals. 3 days later, Ray was called to the county office, the same place where he'd been mocked. This time, the staff greeted him by name, offering coffee and apologies. The county administrator, a woman with a nervous smile, slid a folder across the table. Mr. Miller, the tax errors have been corrected. The auction's voided. The farm is yours. Ray nodded, his throat tight. But there was more. A woman from the governor's office handed him another document. An anonymous donor has set up a trust to cover any remaining taxes and fund repairs to your farm. Ray frowned, his pride bristling. I don't take charity. It's not charity, she said, handing him a sealed envelope. Inside was a note, written in neat cursive. Mr. Miller, in '94, my family lost everything. You gave us seeds, taught my father to grow them. That garden fed us. I'm a CEO now, but I never forgot your kindness. This is repayment, not charity. Ray's eyes stung as he read, a vague memory surfacing. A struggling family, a bag of seeds, a small act he'd barely thought twice about. Is this real? He asked, his voice rough. The woman smiled. Very real. They reached out when your story broke. Ray folded the note, his hands steadier now. He didn't know it, but the donor wasn't alone. Hundreds had called the governor's office, inspired by the viral video offering to help. Lacey County began to change in ways Ray never expected. The diner, once a hub of gossip, now buzzed with stories of Ray's stand. Marge, the waitress, started a Miller Fund jar on the counter, collecting small donations for local farmers facing tax issues. Jenny, the librarian, organized a community day at the farm, where kids learned about crops and history. Even Tom Haskell, once skeptical, showed up with his tractor to help repair Ray's irrigation system. The county office, stung by the governor's intervention, launched a transparency initiative, making auction rules clearer and offering free tax clinics. Ray's story had cracked something open in the town, a reminder that kindness and fairness weren't just ideals, but actions. Ed Grayson, the real estate agent, found his clients drying up as folks rallied against predatory land deals. One evening, as Ray fixed a fence, a neighbor stopped by with a pie and a quiet, "You did good, Ray." The words meant more than he could say. The farm itself transformed too. The donor's trust paid for a new barn roof, updated wiring, and a modern irrigation system. A hand-carved sign now hung at the gate. Miller Farm, established 1927, restored 2023. Ray ran his fingers over the letters, feeling the weight of survival, of legacy preserved. The legacy of Ray's kindness stretched beyond the farm. 2 weeks after the auction, he was invited to speak at the State Agricultural Fair, an event usually reserved for politicians and industry bigwigs. Ray, in his Sunday blue button-down, stood nervously behind the main stage, the locket in his pocket for courage. Governor Langford greeted him, her eyes warm. "Nervous?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ray admitted. "Just speak from the heart," she said. When Ray took the microphone, the crowd's polite applause grew louder as the viral video played on giant screens. His ejection, the governor's arrival, his quiet dignity. He held up the empty envelope that had once held his savings, his voice steady. "I came to save my family's land, not with money, but with what I believe. Fairness, hard work, history." He paused, looking at the sea of faces. "What I got was more, proof that some things matter more than dollars. The crowd rose, their applause thunderous, many wiping tears. Langford joined him, announcing the Family Farm Preservation Initiative, inspired by Ray's fight. His story had reshaped policy, protected others, become a beacon. Back home, Ray found a package from the governor, a framed copy of the initiative with a note. Your courage reminded us to serve people, not processes. He hung it in the farmhouse beside a small plaque. This isn't just land, it's memory. Months later, Ray's life settled back into its quiet rhythm. But the farm was no longer just his. School groups visited, learning from the man who'd stood up to the system. Neighbours dropped by, no longer distant, their offerings of food or help a new tradition. One morning, as Ray repaired a fence, a minivan pulled up. A family stepped out, the youngest boy clutching a notebook. "Mr. Miller," the father said, "my son's got a school project. Can he ask about your farm?" Ray smiled, setting down his hammer. The boy, wide-eyed, asked, "Is it true the governor came because of you?" "Not because of me," Ray said, "because of what this place stands for." He walked them through the fields, showing the oak his grandfather planted, the stream where he'd played as a child. "History's in the land," he told the boy, who scribbled eagerly. Later, alone on his porch, Ray watched the sunset, the fields glowing gold. The locket rested in his hand, Clara's smile preserved inside. His victory wasn't just the farm, it was proof that kindness, quiet and steady, could move mountains. The world had seen him, not as a fool, but as a man who mattered. And that was enough. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the Miller farm, a place that would stand for another generation, whispering of dignity, perseverance, and the power of one small act. Have you seen someone misjudged only to prove the world wrong? Share your story in the comments, hit like, subscribe. Stories like Ray's remind us what matters.